It was exactly the same network. Paul van den Moenans was in charge when I was little. Club of Rome, Le Cercle, Bilderberg. I was just pointing at pictures of perpetrators and then found out that all of them were connected to these organizations. The victim for this ritual looked just like me, except she was a baby.
We're here in the Netherlands with Anneke Lucas from New York. Welcome, Anneke.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm glad we have the opportunity to talk about your book, Quest for Love, Memoir of a Child Sex Slave. I think the title is well chosen because despite the fact that you are a survivor of very serious abuse, you were a child sex slave in a pedophile network of Belgium from the age of 6 to 11.
That's right.
But it seems like your search for true love was something that kept you going and also was making it possible for you to cope with the most dangerous and precarious situations you were confronted with.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for asking that. Yes, it's true. I think the quest for love kept me hoping that there is a way out. And I had a sense of what that meant because I had been loved as a little baby, not by my mother, she was responsible for taking me to the network, but by my caretaker, who my mother was single in 1963, and so she gave me at the local daycare, and the woman there loved me and nurtured me, and in fact probably sensed that I was being abused by my mother, which I was, and brought me back to myself. She actually wrapped me on her body with sheets so that she could have me on her while she took care of the other children. And so I remember, I actually had the songs, I always had to remember the songs. She was French speaking, we were in Brussels, my mother is Flemish, but I started to speak French. And I remember specifically the feeling of warmth and the love that she gave me and her sweetness and being seen as a little baby, as adorable and innocent and being, adored. And so knowing that I'm worth being loved from that experience. And when I was sold into the network, I had that with me, and I think it gave me a sense of right and wrong. And because I had that seed of self-esteem, let's say, I knew that what was being done to me was wrong, at least the first time. And then, of course, everything that they did in the network was to make sure that I would not feel that anymore, and that I would lose that hope, and that I would become sort of like those perpetrators myself, that I would stop hoping. So I have a little death inside and just become like a human shell, which I felt as they were often. And I ultimately did have that experience again of unconditional love in the spiritual experience that I had.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. Do you think that your perpetrators also were envious of that love because there's strength that derives from that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was interesting. The ones that I considered weak, they hated it, and the ones that I considered, I don't know, more intelligent or something, they really liked it because they wanted to use it for other things. But ultimately they also wanted to kill it. They wanted me to come on their side. And so ultimately, this is the reason that I got kicked out very violently, and I shouldn't have survived, but so far so good.
The network included government officials and the homes of very high-profile people. Sex orgies that took place in castles, villas and mansions. Why does this kind of extreme abuse often take place in high circles?
Oh, interesting question. Well, the arrogance, that's sort of part and parcel of that group, and the superiority that they feel towards other people. I believe that it is the greatest trap of that class, because superiority is really a cover for an inferiority complex, which comes from trauma. And in that group, abuse is actually normalized. Sexual abuse of children is normalized, and the elite, the aristocrats, as as I described in my book, brought their own children to be abused. And also those who are satanic and mind control, have mind control slaves, their own children are also being mind controlled and prepared for special roles and so forth. So abuse is part of their culture, traumatization is part of their culture, but they think that it's to make them strong and to basically indoctrinate them into this satanic worldview where human beings are either part of them or their chattel. Either you're superior and you belong to them through your bloodline, or you are inferior and you're nothing. And they they have these horrible names for us, for most of us. And so I had this kind of strange journey in the network itself, that the first 3 years I was considered dispensable. In the Belgian network, my mother was not in it, and I came from the outside, and my life was worth absolutely nothing. And I was in situations where that was made clear.
Yet you survived, and many other children didn't.
I wouldn't say many, but what I personally witnessed is yes. Mm-hmm. And I definitely was in situations where I should have died, but for whatever reason, in fact, there's one situation where it came very close, but it was more because the Baron who was killing a child, and I think it was just accidentally that it was not me, that he got off on my fear. He got off on my fear that day. So he was happy that with my reaction to what he did. And so that was good enough. And then he didn't have to kill me, then he didn't kill me. But certainly, yeah, that was clear. And then at 9 years old, I was actually given to an international networker who was not Belgian. Mm-hmm. I was given by the Belgians for them to be able to do business with these people who were like from the global elite, the global network, and which is the only hierarchy that really exists, I think, in the world. And then the first thing that they did was take my blood. And
how did they take it?
They just took it with a needle. But it was strange because it was that's it. I mean, I've written in my blog and I've spoken quite a bit about the circumstances in which I met, which was a ritual. The Belgians, including Paul van den Boeinans, and he did it. He organized a satanic ritual for this international networkers, because the Belgians at the time, I don't know if it's changed, they were not Van der Boeinans was not a sincere Satanist. You know, he was not really into that, even though he did all the same things, if that makes sense. But so they set up a, let's say, proper ritual. And then when that man took an interest in me, the first thing was done was my blood was taken, and I could see that they were happy with the results. But I didn't really understand this. And it's another survivor who has told me that that must have meant that I'm from a bloodline. So they were like, oh, we're relieved, you know, we can use her. And then I was sent to mind control training so that I could become an elite sex slave, an international elite sex slave, and, you know, create this life for me where I would be secretly spying for my owner.
Yes, because you were brought to Germany for mind control training. That's what you're referring to. And you were about nine and a half.
I was 9 years old.
How did you end up there?
Yeah, so at this ritual, something happened. This international guy took an interest in me. He took me to his homes in the United States, several, and personally trained me for a little while. So this included, I don't know if you know about the Kinsey charts. Kinsey has charts in his book that show the time that it takes an infant or a child to orgasm.
No, I'm not familiar.
Okay, so Alfred Kinsey, you can look that up. He's a big personage. And anyway, this person did that to me, and then manipulated me, and then timed the time it took me to orgasm, and then told me to make it last longer, so that eventually I wouldn't orgasm anymore, so that my pleasure, there would be no pleasure of mine, it would all be in service of the man. And at the same time, he was also teaching me about art, about good food, and basically helping me to know what it's like to live the good life and sharing his life with me in that sense. And took me shopping, showed me, you know, how to feel, how cotton is crispy, and, you know, just to recognize the good quality stuff.
This was in the United States?
Yeah.
Before you went to Germany?
Yeah. That was the beginning of the training, was him personally training me, taking me on his sailing yacht and everything, just so that I would be used to the life. And then also being trained into the ways and so forth. And then I was flown back on his private jet and then picked up by Van der Boeinans in wherever it was, and he then drove me straight to Germany, dropped me off in Heidelberg, and there I was there for 1 month, I believe, about in the summer of 1972, during the summer vacation, and yeah, I was mind controlled trained there to become an elite sex slave.
And what kind of facility was it? Where did it take place? In a military base or a dump, a deep underground military base, or a hospital?
Neither. It looked like a large house, like a very large house, like it would house businesses or something. There was a doctor in charge. Mm-hmm. That doctor's name was Hans Harmsen. Hans Harmsen.
There was a Nazi connection that I didn't really understand.
There was a Nazi connection, that he was part of the Nazi party, but I think more significantly, this doctor was actually the head of Planned Parenthood in Germany for a really long time.
Which is involved in eugenics.
He was actually a eugenics researcher. He was. I found that out later. I didn't know, I was there, I was being mind control trained. There was no research done on me, if that makes sense. What he did with me, and there were 3 young men who were handlers, who were basically working with me more than he was. But there was no experimentation involved. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew what the result would be. And I myself was just stunned at how quickly I was changing and I was, absorbing. Because the traumatization, the shock was really to get me into fight, flight, freeze, collapse mode, so that all the brain activity reduces to the brainstem, so that I would get in this instinctual survival mode where your senses sharpen tremendously, and you from there you go straight to action. So you bypass the rational mind, and the splitting happens automatically. Although in MK Ultra, the splitting happens in a different way, where a new alter is created in order to create a new sex slave for each perpetrator, so to speak. But that wasn't really done to me. I was trained a little differently. I was told by other survivors that it sounded like the Rosicrucians' training on which MK Ultra was based. So I'm not sure. That's what I've learned. It makes sense that in Germany the original mind control would have been created. And then we know that with Project Paperclip, I believe, the Nazi scientists were sent to the U.S. after the Second World War, and then went to work on their experiments, their experiments there. So we know that. I was in Germany. Hans Harmsen was.
You recognized him later on, and as an impulse reaction, you started to choke. Was that a post-traumatic stress reaction, or was it a suicide program that was implanted in you because you were not supposed to recognize him?
Exactly. That was his training, to make sure I wouldn't recognize him. When I saw his face, his photo, I had a very strong thought that I don't know him. And I thought, well, that's strange that I'm thinking that. There must be something there, so I just left his picture around. But I didn't feel anything. I saw his picture, didn't feel anything except for that thought, I don't know him. And so the next thing that happened is I started to choke, but without doing anything. So I was far enough along in my healing that I knew I wasn't going to die. I just had to breathe through this. But it did take all my yoga training to really be able to breathe through this, because I really felt like I was choking. And if I would have added fear to it, if I would have believed that I was in some kind of an attack of some sort, an asthma attack or something, I might have died, But I just knew that it was a reaction and that it was from the mind control training. And what he had done is he had shown his face like that. He had gone, was bedeutet das? What does this mean? And then he would put his thumbs on my throat, and he would push really hard until I would pass out. And he did that repeatedly so that I would have that reaction in order not to remember him. And when I remembered him, I just did feel tremendous hatred. Like I never saw his human side.
It's also really hard to wrap your head around the fact that people would go to such length to set up a training like that, because you were not the only child involved in this training. There were other children, correct?
There were. In fact, I've spoken to other survivors that were at the same facility, and that were special projects from the same, what I call big shot in the book, American perpetrator. And he was an international part of the international elite, but mostly in the network behind the scenes, a very big deal. So, first of all, he would have made a whole lot of money.
With you.
And he probably already did, because I was deployed, if you will. I was, after the mind control training, I was sent to Germany almost every weekend to spend with a German high-placed politician who taught me German properly, because I picked some up before, but and I'm sure it wasn't free. To have a child with you that you can pretend just belongs with you and knows exactly what to say or do, doesn't give anybody, you can get away with it. We would go to with this German, he took me to small pensions. So people were just very excited to host him. He never had to pay for a room, but no one ever asked questions about me, because I knew how to just be with somebody without anybody asking questions. And so he could get away with it, and that was a very big thrill for them. So, first of all, as a young child, the pedophiles would have paid for me, and that would have millions of dollars we're talking about, not just a few thousand. For a mind control sex slave is worth a lot more than, and a mind control sex slave from this guy that is worth a lot more, They price themselves really high. And, as an adult, he was creating, and of course, we have to understand that all the resources that are stolen from us and then that they have are put into these kinds of trainings, both for the specific mind control of certain people that are then given particular roles in the network to keep everything going, as well as the mass mind control. Those are all put into this mostly to keep the great lie going. And the great lie is that who they really are and what they really do. So it's a catch-22. Who they really are and what they really do is the big secret that has to be hidden, and they use all their resources to make sure that it stays a secret.
And it's also exciting for them because it's such a secret and taboo, and that makes children the highest commodity.
Yes, children are definitely a very valuable commodity and are very much used to indoctrinate people. And of course, who is going to rape a child other than someone who will do anything and then also can do anything? And when you do that, it's because you have experienced it yourself, and then you're being offered a release from your own trauma in the most raw way. So the men got very high also.
Yeah, so in order to avoid their own inner pain, they inflict pain on others, on
the
children,
whole world,
on the most vulnerable.
Yes, but
and
also
then,
the whole world.
Yes.
They inflict pain on the whole world because they're at the top of the, whatever we want to, like the external power pyramid. If we look at that, they're at the top of that. So they actually inflict their private, unresolved trauma onto everybody else in some way.
And they are rewarded for it.
Yes. Well, yes and no. What is their reward is
privilege and status.
Yes, that's always it. Power. The reward is power. They live in an earthly paradise, right? They have all the yachts and blah, 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 blah. But they're empty.
And they're not free. Because they have to make sacrifices and prove, and there's always someone else on top.
Exactly. Freedom is perhaps the biggest currency there, because everything they do is about freedom. When you rape a child, they're trying to be free from the burden that was once placed on them when they were being humiliated, when they were being abused. When you're being humiliated and when you feel powerless, and when when you're being given this burden of shame from your abuser. And as a child, you have to take it.
And it's a vicious circle, but it's also interwoven with the power structure, because the most deadened people that have the least empathy, the least feelings, can be the most easily controlled. They're also in the need for the most power.
Exactly.
So it's a vicious circle that needs to be repeated, and it's all about controlling others.
Yeah. Controlling others instead of controlling yourself. No, exactly. It's a vicious circle. And the whole power structure, which often, because it's been in place for so long, people say, well, we can't change that. But no, that is exactly what is changing. The power structure itself is changing. That the power structure only exists to protect power abuse at this time. There's nobody who believes that when the politicians get voted in, that they're actually going to be able to fulfill their promises. And nobody does. And nobody expects that they will. And nobody makes sure that they will. We all, aren't empowered enough to make sure that they do their service correctly for us. We don't even expect that they're actually working for us anymore, which they're not.
Mm-hmm. I would like to go back to the network that you were abused with. It's a Belgian network that is connected to Marc Dutroux through the role of Michel Nihoul. He was the one that organized the orgies that included children, that took place in high-profile houses of high-profile people, politicians, the aristocrats. Marc Dutroux came to the scene years later.
Exactly.
But it was the same network. Could you explain that?
It was exactly the same network. Paul van den Boeynants was in charge when I was little.
Who was he?
Paul van den Boeynants was twice Prime Minister of Belgium, and at the time that I was in the network, he was Minister of National Defense. And Michel Nihoul entered the network probably around 1973. That's when I started seeing him, because I was sold into the network in 1969. And in 1963, Nihoul was showing up, and he immediately took a role of middleman, of organizing, of putting the children with the perpetrators, of dealing with the pimps and the parents, or, he took a central role, and it had a lot to do, I believe, with his incredible admiration for Paul van den Boeynants. He was a classic brown nose who really loved being with the VIPs, and he wanted to do anything for the VIPs. And he was just very, very happy. And he was also a complete psychopath without any. Like, he would make jokes. They were in incredibly bad taste. When he was trying to imitate, a lot of the time he was actually trying to imitate Van den Boeynants. Because he loved, he really liked that man. But when Van den Boeynants could be very funny, dry, humor, very cruel. But when Michel Nihoul, he was just completely flat. I mean, there's just nothing going on there. And he had nothing, like no awareness. Incredible.
Now, he was also one of the defendants in the Dutroux trial.
Exactly.
And in the X-Files mentioned as one of the organizers of these elite pedophile parties.
Yes.
But he was never convicted for it.
He was not.
He, just like Marc Dutroux, who was finally convicted for a life sentence in prison, but they were protected by the Justice Department.
Just as they said, right?
Why was he protected?
Why would he be protected? Marc Dutroux was a small pimp for the network as far as I knew. from other survivors and so forth. Michel Nihoul had a more key role, obviously, and a higher role in the network. As long as they can protect you, they will. And when I was a child, I was very well aware that the people who were at these orgies and my rapists were people in the judiciary, ministers, police commissioners, judges, you name it. They're in the network, they're part of the elitist, or we could say, I called it a club. It was like an exclusive club. It's not all, obviously, but it's enough that it's possible to sabotage a case like that.
And Michel Nihoul would have known too much. In fact, he actually bragged to a journalist of Die Welt, a German tabloid, that he had a compromising file of every politician in Belgium.
I'm glad he bragged about that. It's good that he was such a bragger.
I own the government.
And you, oh yeah, right, and you picked that up. Very good, very good.
The name Van den Boeinans was also mentioned in Le Cercle, the Circle, which was a secret political forum, as you will, just like the Bilderberg group, on invitation only,
yeah,
where the international elite came together. The same names that are connected to this group were mentioned in the Dutroux X-Files.
And it's interesting because Club of Rome, Le Cercle, Bilderberg, among those three, I didn't know any names, so I have worked with people privately, including one of the original investigators. Then I was just pointing at pictures of perpetrators and then found out that all of them were connected to these organizations.
Were you questioned when the Dutroux case was being investigated?
So I left Belgium in 1981 or 82. I never came back. I was not aware of anything that was happening in Belgium, really. I was not aware of the Bende van Nijvel. I was not aware of the kidnapping of Van den Boeinans. And I was really not aware of the Dutroux case either until I actually read about it in the New York Times after Mike Connerot had been fired and the White Marches happened. So at that point I knew that it was already being sabotaged. And also, I didn't get the call for survivors to go and testify. Now, I did go to Belgium. I met with back then. I met with journalists who were working on that back then. Douglas de Koning and Marie-Jeanne van Eerswijk and Annemie Bulté. They wrote the book, The Dutroux Files: What Belgium Was Not Supposed to Know About the Dutroux case, or what Belgium was not supposed to know about. Oh, the X-Files. The X-Files. What Belgium was not supposed to know about the Dutroux case. I told them that I was a survivor. I was, introduced to a few people then, and then there was a little pressure then to testify then, but I did not feel ready to speak up at all. I hadn't even at that point. I was just starting to work with a therapist who could actually even hold it. So I had just had flashbacks and memories, and I was just finding that context even for these memories that I had, that I sat with, and I didn't know what that could possibly be, because how could that have been possibly happening? And then the Dutroux case, it's like, yeah, well, here's how it happened. So I knew I wasn't ready, and then I also was witnessing how X1, Regina Louf, was being treated.
She was nullified. and called delusional.
Horrendous.
Yeah.
She was called she was called delusional, but she was also in a personal way. When those journalists interviewed her, the way she was treated was horrendous. Like, they were very disrespectful. Like, you would never talk to a person that way, but they did. And I thought, no, I can't. I couldn't deal. It's not that I couldn't deal with it. I knew that I had to be strong enough so that that wouldn't be possible to treat me that way. That they couldn't. That I wouldn't be able to. You could try, to treat me that way, but she had no choice. You see, she went to the police when Conrad was in charge. So there was a good team. She had good people around her. There was a sincere effort to undo this, and there was real hope when she went to the police that this was all be uncovered. And then that was completely shut down when Conrad got fired, and her team was also dismissed.
And parts of her story were confirmed by detectives, that she knew details of murders and locations that she could possibly not know if she wasn't there herself as a witness.
Absolutely, but what they did is they fired the entire team that was investigating her, and on some pretext, and then later that was found out that it was just nothing, but they never got their job back. Meanwhile, they were put on leave, and another team came in and then discredited her. But yes, that's true, and one of those people I have spoken with several times, Michel Clip, who was in fact part of that original team and was doing the investigations, and then just recently, really, in the last years, I started speaking to him. I never saw the point of going to the police. I never saw, and I knew I had to be strong enough to speak up.
Yeah, and at the time it wasn't probably safe either, because 30 witnesses have suspiciously died or committed suicide or were suicided. That had some incriminating evidence against Dutroux. Exactly. Or the people in the network.
Exactly. And at the time, the survivors could be ridiculed and passed off as crazy, and then we don't have to kill them. You see, you see, those who had actual physical evidence were killed, and those who were speaking about their experience were what do you call that? Ridiculed, or they were made to seem like they're crazy people.
That's the common pattern,
yeah,
in many ways. In this book, written by the father of Eve Lambrecht, one of the girls that was killed, he writes about Dutroux being working for Staatssicherheit, East German Secret Service of the DDR. And their role was to use children in pedophile settings to create compromising files against politicians and other influential people to use as leverage. These were not just some ordinary statements. They've talked to journalists who investigated the case at great length for years. It's connected to the disappearance of Manuel Schwartwald.
Schwartwald, yeah.
And there are clear connections with the Netherlands. Dutroux was delivering children for boys' brothels in Amsterdam, Rotterdam and Antwerp. The parents of Manuel Schwartwald were invited by the Minister of Justice in Belgium because there was a clear connection. In other words, it was an international network that included big names. Now, what is your personal experience in regards to the Netherlands, to the Dutch pedophile network?
Yeah, so since I can really only confidently speak about my personal experiences. I was a child. So let's say that there were royals, the royals that were present at the orgies. Okay, so there were royals present at the orgies, I'll say that. Perpetrators.
Have you been brought to the Netherlands to Dutch locations?
So I don't remember being brought. I think I was, but I don't have the specific memory, so I can't really speak about that. But I do remember that it was said several times that people went to Belgium for girls and to Holland for boys. That I do remember. And of course boys were used in Belgium, but mostly it was a network that where girls were used for sex. And mostly boys, in my experience, again 69 to 74, it seemed that boys were more often used for killings and less for sex.
In your book, you describe horrific murders on children, torture, even cannibalism, and you do refer to satanic ritual abuse, but you don't, in detail, did not describe it. Is it something that you were not participating in or witnessing, or did you leave it out because it was too grotesque?
No, well, obviously what you just described there is very grotesque, but I don't want to sensationalize, so the book sort of came out of my fingers, and as a child I didn't have this reference that these were satanic rituals. So I do refer back to the satanic ritual, but when I wrote it, that was what I remembered, and then later on the other things came back. Because I didn't remember the American big shot. I didn't remember him until he died, and everything really connected to that. I'd always remembered about Wouter, the little boy who got killed in the satanic ritual in 1972 around the Bilderberg meeting in Knokke Zoet. There was a Bilderberg meeting, and I don't know if that's where the ritual took place, but the ritual was organized around that. And so he was my little friend, and I'd always remembered his brutal murder, and it had been I was grieving that in the 90s. I was grieving it in the 2000s. I mean, it really, I recently got sort of the last puzzle piece of that experience, that his death, my witnessing his death and what happened there, to really finally sort of, if you will, complete that grieving process, which was, of course, we're talking 50 years ago now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it must be really, really hard to process all that, and it must have taken many, many years. When you talk about Satanists, in a recent interview you made a distinction that not everyone that was sadistic and evil within the network was a Satanist per se. Right. Not everyone had the same belief system.
Yes, yes.
What distinguishes the Satanist? Is that the bloodline, heritage, or how would you define it?
So I don't really know, other than that I knew that Van den Boeynants wasn't a Satanist, didn't consider himself a Satanist. And so kind of that was all like poo-pooed all of that, even though he wanted to make connections with the Satanists, the sincere Satanists who were who were more powerful than he was on the global scale. So he wanted to connect with them, but he didn't really respect that. But he did all the same things. He just didn't do it in a ritual way. Now those Satanists, they did believe that. But again, the whole satanic belief, where everything is good is bad and everything, and then all these childish things, do as thou wilt, when you get to the 33rd degree and the Freemasons and everything. So, which is also by invitation. You've said it several times. It's by invitation only. What does that mean? There's a triage happening before to see who can do it and who has that kind of intelligence. That's to say calculation, and who is willing to do anything, and who has that kind of awareness. Because I think you can be a sincere Freemason up until the 32nd degree and never reach the 33rd degree, because you don't really know what's going on, what it's really about. So similarly, as the Satanists, well, there's the thing about the bloodlines, which helps justify their supposed superiority, but it is religious. It's like they get to experience what may be union in that they're all doing it, and that they all get extremely high. And I do feel really strongly that all of Satanism is a very big, complex, long justification to let out their inner demons. So that's to say their unresolved trauma, and to be able to pass it on. And to pass it on and then supposedly get away with it, while becoming, of course, the biggest slaves to Satan. Because there are dark forces, and there are entities, and I did witness very disturbing things that are definitely otherworldly, that these demons or these entities are invited to take possession of someone in these rituals, and they do, and you see them transform, and it's very creepy and very scary. Or during rapes, you do see it. And but as far as the belief system, so they have this belief, and then they do these rituals, and they have these horrendous aspects of the rituals, so like their own inner child is completely dead, and then they can only come to life when during a killing of another child, which is a representative of their own inner child that has to die because theirs is dead, and then they kill another child. And the process of the making dead this child is like the only time they can sort of come alive and feel really alive. And I always felt that whatever they believe, the blood or the sacrificial cannibalism, whatever they believed, I felt that the reason they were so high, they also were taking tons of drugs, but the reason why they were having this what they would call a religious experience, really had to do with that they were getting this incredible relief and release from their own trauma for a little while.
And you also wrote that they experience this tremendous sense of power when they take a life that gives such a high that it's almost a substitute for true love. Is it addictive, just like a drug, or just like adrenochrome, drinking blood that is highly adrenalized?
Yes, and again, there may be science around that, but anyway, I never had heard that word, but I did witness this. But I felt that the high and the rejuvenation, because they did look rejuvenated, is that their inner child is coming back to life for a moment. Because they were getting such an incredible relief and release. And as far as love, okay, so we're talking about the darkest thing in humanity, and we're talking about love at the same time. So that takes a little explanation, I think.
What is love?
Well, I believe that if you have not received any love as a baby, a human being, or maybe ever, or as a baby, if you don't receive it as a baby and you don't know what it is, I think you're doomed. In a way, I feel they are doomed. Because if you don't know what love is, that unconditional love, you also can't recognize it later. So if someone loves you unconditionally, you don't know what it is. So basically, if you're a little child, a baby, and you're not being seen as innocent, well, then then it is possible that later on you're somebody who doesn't believe in innocence because you don't feel your own. So when you are sort of from the beginning abused and treated and used, if you will, abused and which is used and exploited as an object, then what do you have in terms of you have no sense of self. You have no connection to spirit because you need to connect with your innocence in order to actually have a sense of the greater spirit behind you. You need to feel, to access yourself through your innocence.
And many of the elites as a child were lured into this system and broken. But yet a lot of people feel trapped and want to step out of it. An Illuminati insider told me that 95% of the people who are part of this network want to step out, but they feel trapped.
Yeah, and that's an important aspect, but I just want to talk a little bit more about this love question there, so you don't have love. So I feel like you're then doomed because everybody needs love, and so what are you going to get as a substitute? If you give up on love, like, because there's these little deaths, I'm giving up that I can be loved as I am, as me, that I can be accepted, that I can be seen and understood and loved. So if I give that up, then now what am I then? So if I'm shot into this cycle of exploitation from birth onward, then all I'm going to do is exploit. And how am I going to get to feel anything if I have no access to myself? Because I've been shut out from myself from birth onward. That's to say, emotional growth. We can have physical growth and intellectual growth, and a lot of these people are the smartest people in the world. But no emotional growth, like none. So the psychopaths who are, very powerful, because they have no scruples. The psychopaths in this network, they know nothing about, they don't feel anything. So they can go straight to, nothing, that means that nothing means anything. And then you don't really have a real human being, it feels like, because we're feeling beings. And if you don't feel anything, then it's like you're not human. So you're a shell of a person. So how are you going to fill up? How are you going to even feel anything? And then feeling anything comes in the reverse way, exactly what Satanism encourages. That you take energy from the innocent, you take life, everything has to be gotten from the outside. And that's how they fill themselves up. And when they do things that have been done to them, they have been killed, inner childs have been killed, then it gives them the greatest high, which then is in fact a substitute for that true love that they can never have. And to speak of those, you say 95%, that's very encouraging to me, because I do believe that once there's a shift, that's to say, I'm one survivor that's speaking up. There's others. And more and more and more. Every day, another survivor of satanic ritual abuse and mind control is coming out. And try to say that we're all liars, or just try to say that I'm crazy and good luck. Obviously, there's no reason for me to be exposing myself to all this, what I am exposed to, unless, I want to be able to speak my truth and tell my story. And I don't want to give in to the pressure not to do it, because the other people who misbehaved don't want me to. So I know that there's a lot of people who are not comfortable in this, because I know not everybody's a psychopath and not everybody is a full believer, but everybody has their stuff on everybody, right? It's blackmail. And I know that a lot of people must be afraid that their families are going to get hurt. And I know that people do sacrifice their lives. And sometimes their families do get killed. That is real.
And also victims are made into perpetrators. And that's another reason why it's hard for people to speak out, for victims, but also for participants that were lured into it. Because what's your own share in it? What's your own responsibility?
Exactly. And that is why it is in a way easier for me to speak out, because I was out at age 11. But it's true that I was also, and I also write about that in the book, of course, indoctrinated in that same way, that from the beginning, victims of mind control are trained to perpetrate, and done in such a way the message is very clear. And it is first, we're manipulated so that it's very graphic, so that it enters, that it is embedded deeply. That if you don't do what they want you to do, it is always worse for the victim. So you get trained as a perpetrator. And if you are not a psychopath, you're going to feel so guilty, because so afraid that you're bad, so afraid of your power, that you're never going to want to speak out.
And in fact, you were trained to be a spy, a high-level spy, and someone in the entertainment industry, to seduce other men. Yet, in order to get to this very high, comfortable place with all these privileges and status, you had to make a sacrifice.
That's right.
And you refused.
No, because if I had refused, it would have been worse for the victim.
Did you have a choice?
Of course not. But also, they thought of this as a celebration, because this was sort of like, after a year of training, this was my induction. And it was a ceremony that seemed like a week-long celebration of some, lots of people who were at the time in 1973 at the top of their game, I recognized. And meanwhile, I was already being used also during that week. I was also a sex slave, and I was also a spy. I was given to men then, and then I had to tell my owner what they liked sexually and so forth, or what their weakness was. I was constantly working, but it was also a long ceremony where my owner, super proud of what he had created, which was like basically a sexual stereotype. It's going to end up a sexual stereotype, but what he had created, showing that off to his fellow Satanists, and this was the celebration. It was still mind control, in that the victim for this ritual looked just like me.
And that was on purpose.
Of course.
That's
But
how sick these people are.
Except she was a baby. A 1-year-old something.
That's quite a burden to live with, and quite a testimony to make.
It was afterwards. I had to go through with it, I knew that. And the next time that I saw my owner, I went against him. And that's how I got kicked out. And I just, I thought I was just going to be killed, but no. And again, I have been told, if you were from a bloodline, they wouldn't kill you, but they reprogrammed me to make sure I would not become famous, on my own. So I would never feel worthy of success, and that included with photography and everything. So when I was a young adult, it was really painful. But that reprogramming made me feel again, once again, let's say, because I'd already started feeling as the lowest of the low. And then I got to be special for a year, and then back to being the absolute lowest of the low. But I was sent back to the Belgian network in the end. And then when I got back, pretty soon after that is when my book really starts, is when I was then being used when the Belgians didn't really know what happened. But they used me for the VIP visitors, and then the gangster took an interest.
And you also wrote in the book, it takes courage to come forward with your testimony for every survivor of this kind of abuse.
A lot of courage.
Because you wrote, nobody wants to admit that they've been humiliated or been used as a perpetrator, and you were still a child. So
so it's a legal question, but not emotionally. I mean, I'm
yes.
talking about things that nobody wants to talk about.
Right.
Nobody wants to admit that of themselves, because I still did it. And it's very difficult. I mean, I understand. I have healed enough to know that it wasn't my fault. And I did the best I could in an impossible situation. And I was also a victim. I understand all of that. But I still went through with it. I did it. And then there is the grief also. Mm-hmm. Because taking a life, I think, is the greatest trauma. For me, it was rather easy, frankly, to go through all of the things where I had been victimized. Rather easy. The pain was always over the other children. And of course, mostly the children that I had to kill.
It's a very heavy burden to carry, and I have to compliment you for your bravery to come forward and to be this honest on camera, and to be an example for other survivors. In your book, you write about horrific things that have happened to you as well. I mean, you've had to endure torture that is just hard to fathom. But you seem to have come out as a very balanced and very positive person. What's your secret?